My commanding officer was Colonel David Vance, 26 years of service, 3 combat tours, impeccable record. I would have taken a bullet for him. Then, one night in 1998, I saw him alone in the secure facility beneath Fort Meade. What I witnessed wasn't human. His skin rippled and split, revealing scales underneath. His eyes shifted from gray to yellow with vertical pupils. And when he realized that I was there, he moved faster than anything human should be able to move. They destroyed my career, threatened my family, and made sure that no one would ever believe my story. But I know what I saw. Some people in positions of power aren't people at all. If stories about what hides in plain sight matter to you, consider subscribing. We expose these truths every single day, and together we're building a record that they can't erase. My name is Jackson Reynolds. I'm 51 years old. I live in a town I won't name, under a name that isn't the one I was born with. For 26 years, I've been running from what I know, from what I saw, from them. In 1998, I was a staff sergeant in Army Intelligence, assigned to a joint facility outside Fort Meade, Maryland. On paper, it was a signals analysis unit working in coordination with the NSA. In reality, we handled intelligence so sensitive that most of the personnel didn't know what the person at the next desk was working on. Compartmentalization, need to know, black programs within black programs. That's how they keep secrets. They make sure no one person sees the whole picture. Except sometimes, someone sees something they shouldn't. Colonel David Vance commanded our unit. He'd been there for 2 years when I arrived in '97. West Point graduate, Ranger qualified, decorated veteran of Desert Storm. Everything about him screamed competence, professionalism, leadership. Everyone respected him, not just because of his rank or his record, but because he seemed genuinely invested in his people. He knew everyone's name, remembered details about their families, asked about your sick kid or your wife's new job, the kind of commander who inspired genuine loyalty, not just obedience. I'd been at the facility for 18 months when things started to feel off. Small things at first. Details that didn't quite add up. Colonel Vance never ate in the mess hall. Never participated in unit barbecues or holiday gatherings. Always had an excuse. Meetings, briefings, conference calls. After a while, I realized I'd never actually seen him consume food or drink. Not once. He never seemed to sleep either. I worked plenty of night shifts, odd hours because of the nature of our intelligence work. No matter what time I was on duty, Colonel Vance seemed to be there. 300 briefing? He was fresh and alert. 2200 situation report? Same energy level, same sharp focus. And his eyes. In certain light, something about them looked wrong. The pupils seemed too narrow, too vertical. Like a cat's eyes, but not quite. More like a snake. I told myself I was being paranoid. The work we did, the stress, the irregular hours, it messed with your perception. Made you see patterns that weren't there. Made you suspicious of everything and everyone. Until December 8th, 1998. We had a security incident that afternoon. Nothing major. A contractor had forgotten his badge and tried to access a restricted area. Standard protocol was to detain, verify identity, and file a report. But it required Colonel Vance's authorization to resolve. I was assigned to escort the contractor to the colonel's office in the secure sublevel. We called it the Vault. 3 levels underground, accessible only through biometric security, housing the most classified operations at the facility. I'd been down there plenty of times. It was just an office, nothing unusual. Or so I thought. When we arrived, the colonel's aide said he was in a classified briefing and couldn't be disturbed. The contractor and I waited in the corridor outside his office. 20 minutes passed. 30. The contractor was getting agitated. I radioed for instructions. Vance's voice came through my radio. Calm, controlled, authoritative. Hold position. I'll be available in 10 minutes. Another 15 minutes went by. The contractor needed to use the restroom. I called it in, got approval, and escorted him to the facilities 2 corridors away. When we returned, I noticed something. Colonel Vance's office door was slightly open, maybe 2 inches, and there was a sound coming from inside, not voices, something else, something wet and organic. A rustling, sliding sound, like fabric moving, or skin. Protocol said, "Wait for the colonel. Don't enter without authorization." But something about that sound triggered every alarm instinct I had. I told the contractor to stay put. I approached the door quietly, and through that 2-inch gap, I looked inside. Colonel Vance was standing in the center of his office, facing away from the door. He'd removed his uniform jacket and shirt. His bare back was visible in the fluorescent lighting, and it was moving. Not muscle movement, not normal human motion. His skin was rippling, bulging outward in waves that traveled across his shoulders like something underneath was pushing to get out. The surface of his back undulated in a pattern that made my stomach turn. This wasn't how skin worked. This wasn't biology. This was something else. Patches of the pale human flesh seemed to split along invisible seams. The tears spread in perfect geometric patterns, like engineered perforations. The skin folded back, peeling away in sections, revealing what lay beneath. Scales. Not like snake scales. Not like any reptile I'd ever seen. These were larger, hexagonal, fitting together with mathematical precision. Dark green, almost black in the office lighting, but with an iridescent quality that made them shimmer with hidden colors. Blues, purples, shades that shifted as he moved, catching the fluorescent light in ways that seemed unnatural. They covered his shoulders first, then spread down his spine in a perfect line, each scale interlocking with the ones around it. The pattern looked deliberate, designed, like armor that had been custom fitted to a specific body. I couldn't move. My body had gone into some kind of shock, fight or flight response completely frozen. Every rational part of my brain was screaming that what I was seeing was impossible. Humans don't have scales. Skin doesn't split and fold away like rubber. This couldn't be real, but it was. God help me, it was real. The transformation continued. The human skin on his arms began to crack, fine lines appearing along the muscle contours. I watched as his forearms split open, the pale flesh peeling back to reveal more of those iridescent scales underneath. His hands, still recognizably shaped like human hands, but the skin was pulling away from the fingers. Beneath it, I could see the scales extended to include claws. Actual claws where fingernails should have been. Short, curved, sharp. The smell hit me then. A reptilian musk, like a terrarium at a zoo, but stronger. Alive. Predatory. It made my hindbrain scream danger in ways that rational thought couldn't override. As I watched, frozen in horror in the corridor, Colonel Vance reached up to his face with those scaled, clawed hands. His fingers, joints now clearly visible, bending at angles that didn't match human anatomy, double-jointed or maybe triple-jointed, moved with an insect-like precision that made my skin crawl. He grasped at his jaw. At first, I thought he was just touching his face. Then I realized he was gripping the edge, the seam, and he pulled. The sound was the worst part. A wet, tearing sound, like fabric ripping, but organic, living. I heard adhesive giving way, heard structures separating that were never meant to separate. His face split, like a mask coming off, but this was no mask. This was skin, living tissue that had been shaped into human features, held in place by something I couldn't understand, some kind of biological glue or membrane that bound the disguise to whatever was underneath. I saw the seam run from his hairline, down past his temples, following the contour of his jaw. The human face, Colonel Vance's face, the one I'd saluted and reported to for 18 months, peeled away in one complete piece. He held it in his hands for a moment, this hollow mask of human features, eyes empty, mouth slack. Then he set it carefully on his desk, the way you might set down an expensive hat. What was underneath was not human. The face that looked back at me, briefly, before it turned toward the sound I'd made, was longer than a human face. The skull shape was wrong, too narrow, too elongated. The muzzle, and it was a muzzle, not a mouth, protruded forward, filled with teeth that were sharp, triangular, serrated like a steak knife. Dozens of them, more than any human mouth could hold. The nose was just slits. Two vertical openings that flared as it breathed, no bridge, no cartilage structure, just openings in scaled flesh. And the eyes. God, the eyes. They glowed, not reflected light. They produced their own illumination, a sickly yellow-green color, like sulfur or toxic waste. The pupils were vertical slits, narrowed almost to nothing in the office lighting. But I could see them dilate slightly as the thing focused. As it oriented on me through the gap in the door, the skull had a ridge along the top, a pronounced bony structure that swept back from the brow, suggesting a brain case that was shaped completely differently from human anatomy. The whole structure looked ancient, predatory, designed for hunting. This was no human in a costume. This was a creature that had evolved for purposes I couldn't begin to guess at. And it had been wearing Colonel Vance's face so perfectly that nobody had noticed. Not his staff, not his superiors, not the people who saw him every day. He was shedding his human appearance like a snake shedding its skin. My body finally responded. I stumbled backwards, my boot hitting the wall, making a sound. A small sound. But in the underground corridor, it echoed. The thing that had been wearing Colonel Vance's face spun toward the door. Impossibly fast, faster than any human could move. Those yellow eyes locked onto me through the gap. And it hissed. Not a human sound, not anything a person could produce. It was a rattling, sibilant hiss that seemed to vibrate in my chest, a sound that triggered something primal in my brain. Prey instinct, run or die. I ran. I grabbed the contractor, didn't explain, just said, "Move, now." We got to the elevator. I used my override access to bypass the normal security delays. The doors closed just as I heard the colonel's office door slam open. In the elevator, rising toward ground level, I was shaking. The contractor was asking what was wrong, what had happened. I couldn't answer, couldn't process what I'd seen. When we reached the surface, I handed the contractor off to another NCO, made an excuse about feeling ill, went to the latrine, and threw up. I spent the next hour trying to rationalize it. Hallucination, stress-induced psychosis, some kind of test or drill I hadn't been briefed on. Anything except the obvious explanation, that my commanding officer wasn't human, that something else had been wearing his face, that I'd been taking orders from a creature for 18 months without realizing it. At 1700 hours, I was summoned to Colonel Vance's office. He was back in uniform, perfectly pressed, ribbons aligned, hair regulation short. He looked completely human, completely normal. He gestured for me to sit. "Sergeant Reynolds," he said, his voice calm and measured, "I understand you had a medical issue this afternoon." "Yes, sir." I felt ill. It passed. He studied me. Those gray eyes, that now I knew weren't really his eyes, looked into mine. And I swear, just for a fraction of a second, I saw them flicker, saw the pupils narrow, saw yellow replace gray. I'm concerned about your stress levels, he continued. You've been working long hours, irregular shifts. That can affect perception. Cause people to see things that aren't there. I held his gaze, trying not to show fear, trying to act normal. I'm fine, sir. He leaned forward slightly. When people are overtired, when they're under too much pressure, their minds can play tricks on them. They might see things in shadows, misinterpret ordinary events. And if they talk about these misperceptions, if they spread unfounded concerns, it can damage unit cohesion, damage careers. The threat was clear. I understand what you're seeing when you close your eyes, his tone implied. And if you speak about it, there will be consequences. I understand, sir. Good. He sat back. You're a valuable member of this unit, Sergeant. I'd hate to see anything compromise your future. Take the rest of the day off. Get some rest. We'll discuss your next assignment tomorrow. I was dismissed. I left his office knowing two things with absolute certainty. First, Colonel David Vance wasn't human. He was something else wearing a human disguise, an incredibly sophisticated disguise, but a disguise nonetheless. Second, he knew that I knew, and he was giving me one chance to stay silent. That night, I went home to my apartment off base. My hands were still shaking. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw those yellow reptilian eyes staring at me, saw that scaled face beneath the human mask. I thought about going to my chain of command, but Vance was my chain of command. And if he wasn't human, if something had infiltrated that high in Army intelligence, who else was compromised? How far up did this go? I thought about going to the police and tell them what? That my commanding officer was secretly a reptile? They'd have me in a psych ward within hours. I thought about running, just disappearing, but I was active duty military. Going a WOL would ruin my life and make me a target. So I did the only thing I could do. I went back to work the next day and pretended nothing had happened. For 3 weeks, I maintained the fiction. I worked my shifts, followed orders, acted normal. Colonel Vance treated me exactly as he always had. Professional, courteous, nothing unusual. But I was watching him, carefully, looking for more signs, more evidence that what I'd seen was real. And I found them. He never blinked. Not during meetings, not during briefings. His eyes would be open for minutes at a time without a single blink. Humans blink every few seconds. It's involuntary. But Vance didn't. His hands were cold. Not cool. Cold. Like touching marble. I noticed it when he handed me documents, when we shook hands. The temperature was wrong, and his reflection was slightly off. In certain mirrors, in certain glass, there was a flicker, a shimmer, like the image wasn't quite stable, like something was interfering with how light reflected off him. I started documenting everything. Careful notes, times, dates, observations. I didn't know what I was going to do with the information, but some part of me needed to record it, to prove I wasn't crazy. That's when I met Dr. Sarah Chen. She was a civilian contractor, a linguist working on foreign intelligence analysis. She had a top-secret clearance and worked in an adjacent office. We talked occasionally, professional small talk, nothing personal, until one day in late December, she pulled me aside in the parking garage. You've seen it too, haven't you? Her voice was quiet, urgent. In the Colonel. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie. I can tell. You've been watching him the same way I have. You've noticed the things that don't add up. I looked around, checked for cameras, for other personnel. We were alone. What are you saying? She handed me a business card, not her work card, a plain white card with a phone number handwritten on it. There are others, she said. People who've seen things, people who know the truth, Call that number when you're ready to talk, but don't wait too long. They know we're noticing, and they don't let witnesses live once we become a problem." She walked away before I could respond. That night, I called the number. A man answered. No greeting, just, "Yes?" "Sarah Chen gave me this number." There was a pause. Then, "Are you being monitored?" "I don't think so. Where are you?" I told him, "Stay there. Someone will contact you within 24 hours. In the meantime, act normal. Don't do anything that draws attention. Don't discuss this with anyone. Your life depends on your ability to appear completely oblivious." The line went dead. The next day, I received a text message. Unknown number. Just an address and a time. 2200 hours that night. The address was a storage facility in Baltimore. When I arrived, a man was waiting. Middle-aged, unremarkable appearance, the kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after seeing it. "Get in," he said, gesturing to a nondescript sedan. We drove for 30 minutes, no conversation. He was checking mirrors constantly, taking random turns, clearly running counter-surveillance protocols. Finally, we arrived at an abandoned office building in an industrial area. He led me inside, down a stairwell, into a basement room. 6 other people were there, sitting on folding chairs arranged in a rough circle, looking at me with expressions I recognized immediately: fear, confusion, exhaustion, and relief. Relief at finding others who understood, others who'd seen the impossible and knew they weren't insane. The man who'd driven me there spoke. His voice was calm, measured, the tone of someone who'd given this speech before. "We call ourselves the Witnesses. We're people who've seen what you've seen, who know what hides in plain sight. And we're dedicated to documenting it, exposing it, and most importantly, surviving it." He nodded to the others. "Tell them your stories. Start with Catherine." A woman in her 40s, professional appearance, spoke first. Her hands were shaking slightly. "I worked at the State Department for 12 years, policy analysis for Southeast Asia. In 2003, I was part of a classified briefing with Senator Bradford. You might remember him. Armed Services Committee, very influential. During the briefing, we were discussing force deployments in the Pacific. The lights flickered, just for a second, and I saw the senator's face, his reflection in the window glass, flicker with it. She paused, gathering herself. Except his reflection didn't match his face. For maybe half a second, the reflection showed something else. Something with a longer skull. Different eyes. I thought I'd imagined it. But then I started noticing other things. The senator never ate during working lunches. He'd move food around on his plate, but I never saw him actually consume anything. His hands were cold. Not cool, cold. Like touching marble. And his pupils, in certain light, were the wrong shape. I started documenting, taking notes. I got sloppy. Someone saw my notes. 2 weeks later, I was transferred to a posting in Guatemala. Effectively ended my career. I came home to find my apartment had been searched. Very professional, very careful, but they'd been there. My notes were gone. My computer's hard drive had been wiped. That was 15 years ago. I've been watching ever since. Bradford is still in the Senate, hasn't aged a day. Same face, same voice, same cold hands. Another man spoke up. Early 30s, military bearing, former Marine, you could tell from the way he held himself. I was a Lance Corporal at Camp Lejeune in 2005. My company commander was Captain Ortiz, good officer by all accounts. Led from the front, knew his Marines, all the things you want. But there was something off about him. He never slept. I had fire watch duty enough times to know. I'd see his light on at 0200, 0400, didn't matter. Always awake, always alert, never fatigued. After a while, I realized I'd never seen him sleep at all. Not during field exercises, not during deployments, never. And his eyes. Sometimes when light hit them at certain angles, they'd reflect, like a cat's eyes. That tapetum lucidum effect, where you see the eye shine. But humans don't have that. Our eyes don't reflect light that way. I mentioned it to another Marine. Thought maybe he'd notice too. 2 days later, I was pulled into the company office. Captain Ortiz was there. He asked me about my mental state. Said I seemed stressed. Offered to get me a counseling appointment. Made it very clear that spreading strange theories about fellow Marines was detrimental to unit cohesion. I got the message. I never mentioned it again, but I kept watching. And 3 months later, I caught him during a night exercise, saw him standing alone in the tree line, saw his face, just for a moment, look wrong, too long, eyes too far apart, like the human mask had slipped just slightly. I left the Marines after my enlistment ended, but I've been watching these cases ever since, tracking them. Captain Ortiz is a colonel now, stationed at Quantico. 17 years later, and he looks exactly the same as he did in 2005. Hasn't aged, hasn't changed. Because he's not human. A third person, a woman who looked to be in her 50s, spoke next. Her voice was tired, worn down by years of carrying impossible knowledge. I worked at Langley. CIA analyst, Soviet desk during the Cold War, then counterterrorism after 9/11. In '98, I was assigned to a special project, ultra-classified, reviewing historical intelligence photographs for pattern analysis. We had archives going back to World War II. Thousands of photos, state dinners, diplomatic meetings, military briefings. All the major events of the 20th century, documented in classified photographs that never made it to the public record. And I started noticing patterns, faces that appeared across decades without changing. A State Department liaison in a 1943 photo who looked identical to a Pentagon analyst in a 1972 photo. Same person, same face. 30 years later, but not 1 day older. I documented 47 cases, 47 individuals who appeared in photographs spanning 20, 30, even 50 years, showing no signs of aging. Some of them were still in government when I was doing this analysis, still holding positions of influence, still looking exactly as they had in photographs from the 40s and 50s. I compiled a report, very carefully worded, just presenting the data, the photographs, the analysis. I submitted it through proper channels. 2 days later, my clearance was suspended. I was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into my mental fitness for duty. The investigation concluded I was suffering from pattern recognition overload, a documented psychological condition. I was offered early retirement with full benefits, or I could fight the findings and risk being terminated with nothing. I took the retirement. I kept copies of some of the photographs, the ones I'd already digitized for my analysis, but the originals disappeared from the archives. Someone went through and removed them. Very selectively, very carefully. The 47 individuals I'd identified were simply erased from the historical record. But I still have my copies, and I've been tracking those individuals ever since. 30 of the original 47 are still in government or corporate positions, still looking exactly as they did in photos from decades ago. Dr. Chen spoke next. I recognized her immediately, relief flooding through me at seeing her here, confirming I wasn't alone in what I'd witnessed. I'm a linguist, she said. Mandarin, Cantonese, several regional dialects. I was contracted to work at Fort Meade doing translation work for signals intelligence. Standard stuff, nothing unusual. Until I started noticing linguistic patterns in some of the intercepts, communications that our linguists flagged as unusual. Strange syntax, grammatical structures that didn't match any known language family. References to concepts that had no direct translation. I became obsessed with it. Started documenting these anomalous communications, and I noticed they were all associated with certain individuals. certain military personnel who seemed to be at the center of these linguistic anomalies. Colonel Vance was one of them. I saw communications intercepts where his name appeared, and the language around it was wrong. The way people referred to him, the terminology they used, it suggested something that translated more as the observer or the infiltrator rather than just a military rank. I started watching him more carefully, and that's when I noticed the physical anomalies, the cold skin, the eyes that didn't quite match human biology, the movements that were just slightly too precise, too controlled. When you noticed him too, she nodded at me. I knew you were seeing the same things I was. That's why I reached out. Because if two of us independently noticed, it meant this was real. It wasn't just paranoia or pattern seeking. We were seeing something that was actually there. The stories continued. Each person in that basement room had their own encounter, their own moment of seeing behind the mask, and each had paid a price for that knowledge. A Pentagon intelligence officer who'd noticed a deputy assistant secretary who cast no reflection in polished surfaces. An FBI analyst who'd tracked financial records showing certain government officials who'd held positions for decades without any break in employment, without retirement, without the normal career progression that marks human lifespans. A military doctor who'd reviewed classified medical records and found physiological anomalies that didn't match human biology. Each story added another piece to the puzzle, and together they painted a picture that was as clear as it was terrifying. These entities, whatever they were, had infiltrated human institutions at the highest levels. They occupied positions of real power, real influence. They shaped policy, directed operations, made decisions that affected millions of people, and they'd been doing it for a very, very long time. The man who'd brought me there pulled out a file folder. Inside were lists, hundreds of names, organized by institution, government, military, corporate, media, academia. These are confirmed or suspected non-humans, he explained. People we've identified through multiple independent observations, through photographic evidence, through documented anomalies. The list isn't complete. We know there are more, but these are the ones we're certain about. I scanned the names: senators, generals, CEOs, news anchors, university presidents. Some I recognized, some I didn't. But the sheer number was staggering. How many? I asked. In the United States alone? He paused. At least 300, probably more. But we can only confirm 300 through multiple sources, 300 non-human entities in positions of power, 300 creatures wearing human faces, shaping human civilization, pursuing goals that had nothing to do with human interests. What do they want? Someone asked the question we were all thinking. We don't know. The man's voice was grim. We've developed theories. Some think they're just observers studying us. Others believe they're gradually steering human development in directions that serve their purposes. There's evidence they've been involved in major historical events, world wars, economic collapses, technological revolutions, always in the background, always influential but never directly visible. What we do know is that they're very good at staying hidden. They've perfected the disguise. They can hold the human appearance for decades, and they're ruthless about eliminating anyone who sees through the mask. That's why we have to be careful, he continued. That's why we meet like this, in secret, using counter-surveillance. Because the moment they realize we're organizing, the moment they understand that multiple people are seeing the truth and sharing information, they'll move against us. They'll discredit us, destroy our careers. Maybe worse. But we have to document this. We have to preserve the evidence, because eventually Enough people will see. Eventually, the truth will become impossible to deny, and when that day comes, we need to have built a foundation of evidence that proves we were right all along. I spent 3 hours with the witnesses that night, learning about their investigations, seeing their evidence, photographs that showed eyes changing, videos with flickering reflections, medical records showing impossible physiologies. It was real. All of it was real, and I was now part of a group that knew the truth. 2 weeks later, my world exploded. I was arrested on base, 06:30 in the morning. Military police showed up at my barracks, weapons drawn, treating me like a hostile. They handcuffed me, read me my rights, and escorted me to the stockade before most of the base was even awake. The charges were serious: mishandling classified information, unauthorized access to secured computer systems, copying sensitive intelligence data onto personal storage devices, potentially compromising national security. Every single charge was fabricated. But the evidence looked real, looked damning. They had server logs showing my user credentials accessing files I'd never opened. They had timestamps putting me in secure areas during hours I hadn't been on duty. They had a USB drive, allegedly recovered from my personal effects, containing classified documents I'd never seen before. The setup was sophisticated, professional. Someone with serious technical capabilities and access had spent time building a false digital trail that made me look guilty. And they'd done it perfectly. I tried to defend myself, told my appointed counsel that the evidence was planted, that I was being framed because I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to see, that Colonel Vance wasn't human. My lawyer looked at me like I'd lost my mind. You can't say things like that in court. You understand that, right? You mention reptilian conspiracy theories at your court-martial, and they'll add psychiatric evaluation to the charges. You'll be lucky to avoid a Section 8 discharge. But it's true, I insisted. That's why they're doing this. He put his hand on my shoulder. The gesture was kind, but his voice was firm. Listen to me. I've seen this before. Good soldiers, under too much stress, start seeing patterns that aren't there, connect dots that don't connect. What you need is help. Medical help, not a court-martial. That's when I realized. They'd planned this perfectly. If I told the truth, I'd be dismissed as insane. If I stayed silent, I'd be convicted. Either way, my credibility was destroyed. The court-martial itself was a nightmare. It lasted 3 days. The prosecution presented their evidence methodically, professionally. Each piece built on the last. Server logs, security footage, witness testimony from other personnel who claimed I'd been acting erratically. The USB drive with its payload of classified files. My defense was weak. We tried to challenge the digital evidence, suggested the logs could have been falsified. But the prosecution brought in expert witnesses, technical specialists who testified that the security systems were unhackable, that the evidence was authentic. I could see the panel of officers judging me. 5 faces, all military, all career professionals who'd served with honor. They looked at the evidence. They looked at me. And I could see them reaching their conclusions. On the 3rd day, prosecution called Colonel Vance as a character witness. He walked into the courtroom in dress uniform, ribbons perfect, posture impeccable. He didn't look at me, not once. He kept his eyes on the panel, on the prosecution, anywhere but at the man whose life he was destroying. The prosecutor asked him about my performance, my conduct, my state of mind in the weeks before my arrest. Sergeant Reynolds was an adequate soldier, Colonel Vance said, his voice calm and measured. But in the months before his arrest, I noticed changes. He seemed paranoid, suspicious, made strange comments about classified matters. I recommended he speak with mental health services, but he declined. Every word was calculated, every statement designed to paint me as unstable, unreliable, mentally compromised. And because he was a full colonel with a spotless record, because he presented as the epitome of military professionalism, the panel believed him. That night, I sat in my cell and tried to understand how completely they'd destroyed me. Not just my career, my credibility, my future. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built, gone. Because I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to see. The verdict came on day 4. Guilty on all charges. The sentence was harsh. Dishonorable discharge, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, 10 years confinement at Fort Leavenworth. But then my lawyer came to me with an offer. It came, he said, from very high up the chain of command. Generals I'd never meet. Officials whose names he couldn't share. They would set aside the sentence, all of it. I would receive an other than honorable discharge instead of dishonorable. I would serve no prison time. In exchange, I would sign documents agreeing to never discuss my work at Fort Meade, never speak about classified operations, never make contact with former unit members, and I would leave the military immediately. No appeals, no delay. I would be processed out within 48 hours and escorted off base with whatever personal effects I could carry. What happens if I refuse? I asked. My lawyer's face was grim. Then you serve the 10 years, and when you get out, you'll be a convicted felon with a dishonorable discharge. You'll never work in security again, never hold a security clearance. You'll be unemployable in any field that requires background checks. Your life will be over. They weren't giving me a choice. They were offering me a slightly less destroyed version of the future they'd already taken from me. I signed the documents, all of them. ND. As so comprehensive, they covered everything about my service. Agreements never to seek employment with any government contractor, waivers preventing me from discussing my case with media, with lawyers, with anyone. They gave me 48 hours. I packed my belongings into 2 duffel bags. My uniforms, my awards, my military ID, everything that proved I'd served, it all had to be surrendered. They even took my dog tags. When I walked off Fort Meade for the last time, I was wearing civilian clothes I'd bought at the base exchange, carrying 2 bags containing everything I owned, and watched by military police to make sure I actually left. The real destruction came after. My wife, Angela, she'd stood by me through the court-martial. She believed I was innocent. She believed the charges were false, but she didn't understand why. I couldn't tell her. The NDS forbade it. And even if I could have, what would I say? That I'd seen my commanding officer transform into a reptile? She'd have thought I was insane. The discharge destroyed our marriage in slow motion. I couldn't work. Who hires a guy with an other than honorable discharge? No security clearance, no military experience that could be verified, no references who'd speak on my behalf. I couldn't even get a job at a convenience store. Background checks flagged me as a security risk. The money ran out fast. Savings, credit cards, borrowed money from family. Angela worked 2 jobs trying to support us, but it wasn't enough. The stress, the financial pressure, the fact that I couldn't explain what had really happened, it ground us down. We fought. About money. About my inability to find work. About the secrets I was keeping. About the paranoia she said I was displaying. She thought I was having a breakdown. Maybe I was. How do you tell the difference between justified paranoia and mental illness when you absolutely know that something impossible is real? Our daughter, Emma, she was 6 years old. She didn't understand why Daddy wasn't in uniform anymore, why we had to move out of base housing, why Mommy was crying all the time. The divorce papers came 8 months after my discharge. Angela wanted full custody. Her lawyer argued I was mentally unstable, unemployed, unable to provide a stable home. They brought up the court-martial, the charges, the discharge. Painted me as a security risk who'd endangered national secrets. I didn't fight it. How could I? Everything they said was technically true, even if the reasons behind it were false. And some part of me thought maybe Emma was better off without me, without the target my knowledge had painted on my back. The custody hearing was the worst day of my life, worse than the court-martial, worse than watching Colonel Vance's transformation, because this time I was losing my daughter. The judge awarded Angela full custody. I got supervised visitation rights, 2 weekends a month, but even that ended after a year. Angela remarried, moved to California with her new husband. The distance made visitation impossible. And Emma, she was young enough that eventually I just became the absent father she barely remembered. I changed my name legally. Jackson Reynolds became James Carter. I moved away from Maryland, away from anywhere I had ties, started over in the Midwest where nobody knew me, nobody could connect me to my past. Getting a new identity helped with employment. As James Carter, with a social security number and a driver's license that had no military history attached, I could get jobs that didn't require deep background checks. Warehouse work, construction, manual labor that paid cash. I lived in cheap apartments, drove beat-up cars, kept my head down and my mouth shut. But the paranoia never left. I knew they were watching, knew that somewhere in the intelligence apparatus, people were keeping track of the witnesses, waiting for us to make mistakes, waiting for chances to silence us permanently. Dr. Chen disappeared first, just vanished. One day she was in contact with the group, the next day her phone was disconnected, her email bounced back, her apartment was empty. The landlord said she'd moved out suddenly, left no forwarding address. We tried to find her, searched databases, checked border crossings, looked for any trace. Nothing. She'd either gone so deep into hiding we couldn't find her, or they'd gotten to her. We never knew which. Then 2 more members of the witnesses vanished. Same pattern. Just gone. No trace, no explanation. The remaining members scattered. Some went international, fled to countries without extradition treaties. Others just disappeared into anonymity, became ghosts in their own country. I chose the second option. For 26 years, I've lived as James Carter. I work jobs that pay under the table when possible. I avoid cameras. I don't use social media. I don't have credit cards or bank accounts if I can avoid it. I pay cash for everything. I move every few years, never staying in one place long enough for patterns to develop. And I watch. Always watch. Because they're still out there, still in power, still wearing human faces while pursuing goals I can't understand. I've kept track of Colonel Vance's career. It's not hard. His service record is public information up to a certain point. By 2005, he was a full colonel. By 2010, a 1-star general. By 2015, 2 stars. Now he's at the Pentagon, working in a position that has something to do with joint operations planning. 34 years since I first served under him. And in recent photos I've found online from military ceremonies and public events, he looks exactly the same. The same face, the same gray eyes, not a day older than he appeared in 1998. Because he's not human. And he's not aging like humans age. I've watched the other names from the witnesses list too. The senator who served in 2003 is still in the Senate, still on the Armed Services Committee, still making decisions about American military policy. 21 years later, and she hasn't aged. The Pentagon analyst from the 1940s photographs is retired now, but I found a recent photo from a think tank event. She looks to be in her 60s, but if the photographs are accurate, she should be well over 100 years old. The patterns are there. Once you know what to look for, once you understand the signs, you see them everywhere. People in power who don't age, who don't eat, whose eyes reflect light wrong, whose reflections don't quite match their physical forms, whose body temperatures are wrong. They're all around us. They've been here for longer than we realize. and they're very, very good at staying hidden. But I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of carrying this knowledge alone, and I'm watching as more people start to notice. As conspiracy theories that once sounded insane start to feel real, as more witnesses come forward, despite the risks, the internet has changed everything. In 1998, when I first saw Colonel Vance's transformation, there was no easy way to connect with other witnesses, no platforms for sharing information anonymously. The witnesses had to meet in person, take enormous risks just to communicate. Now, people are sharing their observations online, posting videos of political figures whose reflections don't match, analyzing photographs that show people who haven't aged across decades, documenting physical anomalies, behavioral patterns, linguistic quirks that suggest something non-human. Most of it gets dismissed as conspiracy theory. Deep fakes, Photoshop, paranoid delusions, and yes, a lot of it is false. People seeing patterns where none exist, confusing ordinary human variation with evidence of infiltration. But some of it is real. Some of it matches exactly what I saw, what the witnesses documented. I've been following these online communities carefully, using encrypted connections, anonymous accounts, all the precautions, and I'm seeing patterns that suggest others have encountered what I encountered. A congressional staffer who posted about a senator who never sweats, even in sweltering Washington summers, who maintains the exact same body temperature in all conditions, who's been in office for 28 years but looks 40. A Pentagon janitor who described finding a scale in a classified office. Not a fish scale, not a snake scale. Something else. Something that looked almost metallic, with an iridescent quality that seemed to shift colors under different light. He posted photos before his account was deleted, a security contractor at a state dinner who captured footage of a diplomat whose eyes reflected the camera flash wrong. The tapetum lucidum effect, that eye shine you see in animals with night vision. But humans don't have that. Our eyes don't work that way. The footage was scrubbed from the internet within hours, but not before people downloaded copies. These aren't coordinated hoaxes. These are independent observations from people who have no connection to each other, no reason to collaborate on a shared delusion. They're seeing the same anomalies I saw, the same signs that something non-human is present in our institutions. And the response is always the same. The accounts get deleted. The posts disappear. The witnesses are discredited, labeled as conspiracy theorists, mentally ill, attention seekers. Their employers mysteriously let them go. Their security clearances are revoked. Their lives are systematically destroyed, just like mine was. But there are too many of us now. Too many people seeing. Too many incidents documented. The evidence is accumulating faster than they can suppress it. I've also been tracking specific individuals, building on the list the witnesses compiled 26 years ago, and what I'm finding is disturbing. Remember those 47 people in historical photographs who didn't age, the ones the CIA analyst identified? I've found recent photos of 31 of them. They're still in positions of influence, still active in government, in corporations, in think tanks, and they still look exactly as they did in photographs from the 1970s, 80s, 90s. One of them appeared in a State Department photo from 1974. A Deputy Assistant Secretary for European Affairs, young, maybe mid-30s in appearance. I found a recent photo from 2022. A corporate board member for a major defense contractor. Same face, same person. 48 years later, still looking mid-30s. The math doesn't work, unless they're aging at a dramatically slower rate than humans, or not aging at all. I've also noticed recruitment patterns. Certain families seem to produce an unusually high number of people who enter intelligence services, diplomatic corps, military command. Families where members appear in positions of influence across multiple generations. But when you look at photographs, the resemblance is too perfect. Not family resemblance. Identical. as if the same individuals are appearing across decades, claiming to be different family members. There's a general currently serving who looks identical to a colonel photographed in Vietnam in 1968. Official records say the colonel died in combat, but I've seen the photos. Same face, same eyes, same small scar above the left eyebrow. The general claims to be the colonel's grandson, but the resemblance is too exact, too perfect. Identical twins don't look that identical. And I've been tracking Colonel Vance specifically. His career trajectory is interesting. He moves between posts every few years, standard for flag officers, but he always ends up in positions with access to classified intelligence, joint operations planning, strategic policy, positions where he can observe, influence, shape decisions about military deployments, strategic initiatives, technological development. He's been photographed at dozens of official events over the years, military ceremonies, congressional hearings, Pentagon briefings, and in every photo, in every video, he looks exactly as he did in 1998, exactly as he did in 1997. His appearance hasn't changed in over a quarter century. That's not normal aging. That's not good genetics or healthy living. That's something else. I've also noticed he's never photographed eating. There are hundreds of photos of him at official functions, military balls, state dinners. He's always standing near food, sometimes holding a plate. But I've never found a single photograph showing him actually consuming anything. His glass is always full. His plate is always untouched. Small details, easy to dismiss individually. But collectively, they paint a picture of someone who's maintaining an appearance, playing a role, but not actually participating in the biological necessities that define human existence. The question that haunts me is, why? What's their endgame? If these entities have been infiltrated in human institutions for decades, possibly centuries, what are they trying to accomplish? They're not taking over directly. They're not revealing themselves. They're not implementing any obvious agenda that I can identify. Instead, they seem to be steering, influencing, shaping events from positions of advisory authority. They're in the intelligence apparatus, where they can control information flow. They're in military command, where they can influence operational decisions. They're in diplomatic corps, where they can shape international relations. They're in corporate leadership, where they can direct technological development and economic policy. But to what end? Some of the witnesses theorize they're preparing humanity for something, gradually advancing our technology, our social structures, our understanding of the universe towards some goal that serves their purposes. Others believe they're suppressing certain developments, keeping humanity from achieving capabilities that might threaten them. I don't know. I just know they're there. They're real, and they're very interested in maintaining the illusion that they're human. There's another possibility that terrifies me. What if this isn't infiltration? What if they've been here all along? What if human civilization developed alongside them, with them embedded in our societies from the beginning? What if the power structures we think of as purely human have never been purely human at all? Historical records are full of anomalies. Leaders who seem to possess impossible knowledge, individuals who appeared in positions of power across lifetimes that should have been too long, accounts of people whose appearance would change, whose true nature would be glimpsed in unguarded moments. We dismiss these as myths, legends, superstition from less enlightened times. But what if they were accurate observations? What if people in the past saw exactly what I saw and tried to warn others, and were dismissed as insane or superstitious just as I've been dismissed? The implications are staggering. If these entities have been shaping human civilization for centuries, then everything we understand about our history might be wrong. The wars, the revolutions, the technological advances, the social movements, They might not have been purely human-driven events. They might have been guided, manipulated, designed to serve purposes we don't understand. I've spent the last few years trying to identify patterns in major historical events, looking for signs of non-human influence. And what I'm finding is disturbing. Major wars often seem to involve key advisors or intelligence figures who appear in multiple conflicts across time periods too long for normal human lifespans. The same faces in different wars, different countries, always in advisory roles, never on the front lines, never directly in command, but always there, shaping strategy, influencing decisions. Technological breakthroughs sometimes seem to occur simultaneously in different locations, as if someone was distributing information, seeding ideas, ensuring certain developments happened on specific timelines. The anomalous technological leaps that historians struggle to explain, they make more sense if you assume someone with advanced knowledge was guiding the discoveries. Economic collapses and recoveries follow patterns that seem almost orchestrated, as if the financial systems we think we understand are actually being manipulated by entities with much longer time horizons and much different goals than human economic prosperity. I can't prove any of this. I'm just one person, looking at publicly available information, trying to identify patterns in noise. But the more I look, the more evidence I see of something deliberately shaping human events, something with a long-term plan, something that's been executing that plan for longer than individual human lifespans allow. And they're still here, still in power, still wearing human faces, still working toward whatever goals they've set. The question that keeps me awake at night is, what happens when their goals conflict with human survival? What happens if we're just a resource to them, something to be managed and harvested and ultimately discarded when we've served our purpose? Or what if it's the opposite? What if they're protecting us from something? What if their infiltration and their influence are actually necessary for human survival, and revealing their presence would disrupt some larger plan that's keeping humanity safe? I don't know. I can't know. I'm just a former staff sergeant who saw something he shouldn't have seen and has spent 26 years trying to understand what it means. But here's what I do know. They're real. They're here. And more people are starting to see them. The truth is coming out. Slowly, but inevitably. Too many people have seen. Too many have documented. The wall of secrecy is cracking. Colonel David Vance is still serving in the military. I checked recently. He's a 2-star general now, working at the Pentagon. Same face, same gray eyes, same human disguise. 28 years later, and he hasn't aged a day. Because he's not human, and he's not alone. Look at the people who hold power. Really look at them. Watch their eyes, notice who never seems to age, who never seems to eat, who moves in ways that don't quite match human biology. Pay attention to the reflections that don't match. The photographs where something is off. They're among us. They've always been among us. And the only reason they've stayed hidden is because we've been conditioned not to see them. I'm Jackson Reynolds. I was a staff sergeant in Army Intelligence. On December 8, 1998, I saw my commanding officer shed his human skin and reveal what he really was. They destroyed my life to keep that secret. But secrets this big can't stay hidden forever. If you've seen something that doesn't make sense, if you've noticed people in power who don't seem quite human, if you've felt that something fundamental about our reality is wrong, you're not crazy. You're seeing what's really there. And there are more of us than they know. The witnesses are still out there, still watching, still documenting. And we're growing. Every person who sees the truth, who refuses to look away, who adds their voice to the evidence, makes it harder for them to maintain the illusion. I've spent 26 years in hiding, 26 years afraid, 26 years wondering if they'll finally come for me. But I'm done being silent. Because the truth matters, because people deserve to know, because the world needs to understand what hides in plain sight. They took my career, my family, my name, my life. But they didn't take my memory. And they can't silence all of us. Look at your leaders. Question what you see. Trust what your instincts tell you when something feels wrong. Because the reptilian creatures that walk among us are counting on you not to notice. They're counting on your brain filling in the details, on your rational mind dismissing the impossible. Don't give them that comfort. Watch, document, share what you see. Join the growing community of people who know the truth, because together we're building a record they can't erase. Together, we're forcing the revelation they've feared for centuries. The age of their hiding is ending, and what comes next will change everything humanity thought it knew about who really runs this world. Have you ever looked at someone in power and felt something was wrong? That they weren't quite human? Share your observations in the comments below. You're not alone in what you've seen. There are thousands of us now, building evidence, connecting patterns, exposing the truth. Subscribe to join us, because this revelation is coming whether they like it or not. And every witness who steps forward makes it impossible for them to maintain the lie.